what exactly the main function contains. It contains all set of statements and it have a prototype also, and it can able to call the subprogram also. It means that return function helps to return the value from called function to calling function. From main program, whatever data we are using, parameters we are using, that can be called as actual argument. The same variable we are taking copy of that and we work on that, that can be called as formal arguments. Welcome back to one and all. Myself, Vasanta, lecturer in Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysore. Today, we are going to start with the second session of user-defined functions chapter. Whereas in the previous session, you have studied regarding definition regarding user-defined function. What do you mean by user-defined function? When they come on function, function means set of statements. It contains set of statements and it will perform some specific task. After performing the task, it will generate the result. When they come on function, there are two types. One is library function and one more is user-defined functions. Whereas library functions are, it is already built, it's a predefined one. Whereas user-defined function are the functions which are defined by the user. Whereas in the previous class you have studied what do you mean by user-defined function. Then advantages of user-defined function. When they come on advantages, here whatever thing the user want, like that, whatever way they want, like that, they can able to develop their functions here. And here, by using modular technique, we can able to process. Time consumption will be reduced. Teamwork can be performed. Accuracy will be more here. And when they come on the next one, function definition or structure of user-defined functions. Then how to write the general structure of user-defined functions. Regarding that, you have studied in the previous session, whereas on today's session, you will come to know regarding calling a function. Whereas in the previous session, you have studied how to create a function. But today, you will study regarding how to invoke, or we can say it as call a function here. Then main function, then returning a value. After processing, how to return, how to generate the result from one part of the program to another part of the program, or from subprogram to main program. Then function prototype. Function prototype is nothing but before using that function, the declaration of functions can be performed. How we can able to perform the prototype. Then different types of arguments. Actual argument, then what do you mean by formal arguments? First of all, what do you mean by arguments? Regarding that, you will study on today's session. Now, first we'll discuss about calling a function. What do you mean by this calling a function? Whereas in the previous session, you have studied regarding how to create a function. There first we have the return type, for example, int, and then function name add. Then here I will take argument. Two arguments here, for example, I will take. Then here everything written inside the flower bracket. Here local variables. For example, int c here I will take. Then I will take the calculation. Then return here a plus b I will write, for example. Then here how we are calling this function. That is how to invoke a function. Here if I want to invoke a function, the definition of the program can come either before the main function or after the main functions also. Before the main program also we can write, or after the main program also we can able to write this function. Calling function is a function that transfer control from it to another function by specifying the name of that function and passing the arguments. Consider this the subprogram. We have main program. From main program, how we can able to call this subprogram? That is nothing but calling a function. Whereas call function is a function that receives the call and arguments from the other calling function. When we come on function call is the statement that is used to call or to make another function execution. We can able to execute one program or subprogram here. When a function call is made, the control jumps calling function to the called function. For example, from main program to subprogram, how the control will jump. When I am to call the subprogram, automatically the control will jump to that particular subprogram here. When the come on this, when the function call is made, the control jumps from calling function to the called function here. For example, from main program to subprogram, the control will jump here. When they come on this, the general syntax to represent is variable. First, you have to mention the variable. Then, which is a function you are calling, that function name. Then, inside the bracket, argument list. Then, you have to put semicolon to call the subprogram, or we can call it as function. Or we can say that variables equals function name. Empty bracket also we can write. It means that there is no arguments here. Whereas if you have arguments, then write on that inside the parenthesis. If you don't have any arguments, just write an empty parenthesis. For example, big equals biggest here is the function, and here 3 arguments values are there, A, B, C. Like this, we can able to call the function here. This is a general pattern, syntax to call the sub-function here. When they come on, the next one is main function. What exactly the main function contains? It contains all set of statement, and it have a prototype also, and it can able to call the subprogram also. Whereas the main function returns a value of type int to the operating system, for example. On that case, it will generate integer format. The result it can able to generate. Whereas if you observe in the previous case, here after calculation, we are generating integer format. Whichever type we want, like that type, we can able to generate the result here. Then when they come on this, the main function returns a value of type int to operating system here. If the program runs successfully, 0 is returned. If it is correct, that will return 0. Otherwise, then a non-zero value is returned to the operating system, indicating that the program contains error. Yet observe, the program runs successfully, 0 is returned. If it is non-zero, then it means that some error is there. If the main function is not returning a value, the data type void can be used as return type specifier. If there is no values are generating from one program to another program, or from one function to another function, then we are using the word void. From that, it indicates that no values are generating here. And when they come on the general syntax, here, for example, int we used to write. If you want, you can write int or void also you can write, or float, whichever type of value you want to generate, that you can mention here. Here, if you want, you can write int or you can write void also. Void main, it means that starting of the main program. See here int, here we are given as void. Then executable statements you have to write. Then here return 0. It means that here if you write integer, then you have to write return 0 or float, whichever type it is that you have to mention. If there is no int, char, float, or if you have void, then no need to use the word here return. It means that if you are not using void, then no need of using return here. This is the general syntax to represent the main function. Next, we will move on returning a value. What do you mean by returning a value? When we come on functions, consider we have one main program and one more is subprogram. Here, first, here from the main program, arguments are passed. Arguments are passed, and in the subprogram, after calculation, it will generate the result to the main program, where it may be integer format, character format, or float format, sometime void also. If it is void, then there is no values are returning from subprogram to main program. Whereas returning a value, which type of value here we are returning? That regarding main it will tells you. When a function is called, it is invoked. The statement in the called functions are executed. Whenever we have to call the subprogram, automatically when the function is called, then the statement in the called functions are executed. Whatever statement here in the called function, that will executed. After executing the statement, the function returns a value to the calling function. Consider this is the calling function and this is the called function. After calculation, it will generate the result to the calling function. After executing the statement, the function returns. It will going to generate the result, returns the value to the calling function. The return statement is used to return a value here. For example, from main program, I will pass the value A and B as the argument. For example, I want to perform addition of two numbers. Then here it will calculate A plus B. I am going to call this as result as C. Whereas here it will generate the result C to the main program, that is returning a value. A function can return only one value or none to the calling function for every function call here. The general form for returning a statement is just you have to use the keyword return, then whichever expression you want you can write. Or you have to write return 0 also. Return 0 also you can write, or return expression. Whereas if you observe here, in the previous case, there we have written return expression inside the brackets. It means that the result here I want to write A plus B. Or you can write, for example, here C equals A plus B. Here we can able to return C also. Like this also we can return a value. It means that return function helps to return the value from called function to calling function. Next we will move on function prototype. What do you mean by this prototype, especially function prototype? Function prototype will tell you what is a function name, how many arguments are there, which type of value it has to generate after calculation, everything it will tell you. Function prototype. Before using that function, you have to write which are the arguments, what is a function name, which type of value it has to generate after the calculation, everything we have to declare. That is about function prototype. Whereas a function prototype is a declaration of the function. That is declaration of the subprogram. That tells the program about the type of values written by the function. After calculation, which type of value it has to generate, and number of types of arguments, number of numbers and type of argument which you are passing here. That means which number we are passing, how many arguments are there, regarding that it will tell you. The general form of function prototype is, first you have to write the return type, then function name, inside the bracket type of argument, whether it's integer, character, that you have to mention, all the arguments you have to write. Or you can say that return type specifier, function name, only type also you can write here. For example, int biggest is the function name, and here after calculation it has to generate the result as integer format. Here 3 arguments are there. All the 3 arguments are of type integer only. Which are the arguments? X, Y, Z. All the 3 arguments of type integer only. It means that here calculation result return value is integer, function name is biggest, and arguments are X, Y, Z, and all the 3 arguments of type integer here. This is nothing but prototype. Before using the subprogram or before using the function, declaration of the return type, function name, arguments is called it as function prototype. Next we will move on types of arguments. Types of arguments. What do you mean by first of all arguments? When we come on arguments, arguments is nothing but values which we are passing. Whether from main program to subprogram or from subprogram to main programs. Arguments we can say, or we can say parameters also we can say. Arguments, parameters, or we can say it as values also. Whereas a variable in a function header is called an argument. The arguments are used to pass information. We can say it as information, values, parameters, arguments from the calling function to the called function. Here arguments we are passing from main program to subprogram, that is from calling function to called function. When we come on arguments, there are two types, actual arguments and one more is formal argument. But when we come on actual arguments, the function call statement contains name of the function and the list of arguments to be passed. It means that it contains name as well as list of arguments we want to pass here. These arguments or parameters are called as actual arguments. So observe here in the previous case, here this can be called as actual arguments. X, Y, Z are the actual arguments. Whereas in this, arguments can be constant variables or expressions also. It may be constant variables or it can be expression also. For example, big equals biggest ABC. This is nothing but arguments, actual arguments. Next, we'll move on formal arguments. Already I told you, in arguments we have two types, actual argument and one more is formal argument. Whereas actual arguments are the values, variables, parameters. But when we come on formal arguments, the function header contains return type specifier, the function name and list of arguments with their declaration usually. These arguments are called as formal arguments or we can say it as dummy arguments. Whereas actual arguments are the original value, formal arguments are the dummy values. It's a copy of that, it's a dummy value only. Whereas when they come on actual, it's a original value. Whereas formal value is nothing but copy of that or we can say it as dummy value also. The formal argument gets their value from actual arguments. From main program, whatever data we are using, parameters we are using, that can be called as actual argument. The same variable, we are taking a copy of that and we'll work on that, that can be called as formal arguments. For example, int biggest, int x, int y as well as int z. These are the formal arguments. When we come on the next one, local variables. Variables can be declared. It may be local variable or it may be global variable. Whereas local variable will work only for that particular block only. For example, now I am writing one function, one small function block I will write, that I will declare the local variable. Whereas for example, here I am going to write int is the return type value and function name I given as add. Then here int x as well as int I will take two arguments, int x as well as int y. Then in this block, especially inside this sub function, I am declaring the variables. For example, int c. It means that here this c, especially int c, can be called as local variable because this variable work only for this particular block only. This variable will not work for other side. If it is global variable, then it will work anywhere in the program, where it may be main program or it may be sub program, anywhere it can work. If you observe local calls, there what happens? In the local calls, that will work only for limited area only. In the same way, local variables work only for that particular blocks only. But when they come on STD, ISTD call, there it will cover large geographical area. It means that in global variable declaration, that variable can work anywhere in the program. When they come on local variables, the variables declared inside the function. Here it is declared inside the function or block set to belongs to that blocks. These variables are called as local variables. Values of local variables are accessible only in that block only. Whatever C here we are declared, that can be accessed only on this particular block only. The function's formal arguments are also considered as local variables. For example, here consider function name, here int a, int b, two values we are taking a and b, both the values of type integer. Then here I am declaring inside this particular function int x comma y. It means that here we have two variables x and y of type integer. These two variables X and Y are called as local variable. And this will work only for this particular block only. We can able to access only on that particular block only. Outside that block, it is not possible. Next, we'll move on global variables. Global, already I told you, it will work anywhere in the program, not only within the block. The variables declared outside the function are called as global variable. It will not declare inside the function, it will declare outside the function. These variables are referred by the same data type and same name throughout the program in both calling function and called function. Both in main program as well as in subprogram, anywhere we can able to use, anywhere we can able to access that values. Whenever, if some variables are to be treated as same value in both main and in other function, it advisable or to save global variable, or we can use global variables here. For example, before the main program we have declared the variable int a and b. This can be called as global variable. In the main program I have declared two variables int p and g, or we can say it as p and q. Here what happens? P and Q can be called as local variable. A and B can be called as global variable. Now is it clear? Next we'll move on the next concept, scope of variables. What do you mean by scope of variables? When I come on, scope of variables refers to the part of the program where the value of the variable can be used here. Value we are using here. The scope of variables begins from where the variable declared. From where we are declared, from there the scope will start. If the declaration is inside the function, the scope extends to the end of innermost block that contains the declaration here. This is regarding scope of the data. From where we are declared, from there it starts the scope. And until we are going to close that scope will be there here. These are the major concept on today's class you have studied. That is, what do you mean by variables? That too, local variables, global variables, how to call the function, how to write the main program, that is calling function, called function, how to call the called function, then how exactly it will work. Regarding that you have studied. Next class you will come to know regarding different types of function. That means how we are passing the arguments from main program to subprogram, or how we can able to return the value from subprogram to main program. Regarding that you will study in the next session. Thank you for all of you.